we want to listen to someone whom I just met, who actually reports to the governor of Louisiana, Bobby Jindal, whose locker was 3 or 4 down from mine, as I was explaining to him in the house gym. But this young man has a resume that if I read it, it would cut into about half his time. He's brilliant, he's committed, and he is let me read this now, is currently the chair of the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority of Louisiana and executive assistant to the governor for coastal affairs. So I know listening to him is going to be informative, and I hope that as time moves on, that he and the relationships that he has made as a result of Katrina become part of this larger effort that is so important to our future. So if Garrett Graves will come forward, let's give him a nice round of applause.
All right. I'd like to thank you guys for giving me an opportunity to be here today. I guess I'm supposed to say y'all an opportunity for being here today. And because I have to catch a flight, that's going to be the last time I speak slow. All right. So in Louisiana, we have no shortage of disasters. And just rolling through some pictures. Here's the BP oil spill. There's the spill. Cam, you remember these. The beaches in Louisiana, this is what they look like. Here's our wildlife. This was after a hurricane in southwest Louisiana and in Texas. This was after Hurricane Rita in 2008. This was after Hurricane Ike, or excuse me, this is Gustav in the bottom right. That was actually a wall. That's a flood wall right there, and that's showing you the water is basically going over the wall. And then this was Texas after Hurricane Ike in 2008. This was in 2012 after Hurricane Isaac. The interstate was actually shut down. It was all flooded. This was New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. That's the Superdome after Hurricane Katrina, where just on Sunday we destroyed the Dallas Cowboys. And that's not bad. That's not bad parking jobs up there on the top. That was Hurricane Katrina. And the bottom one on the right is Hurricane Katrina. So no shortage of disasters. And as you see communicated here in the bottom right, such profound personal impacts by these huge disasters. So we're going to talk a little bit about Louisiana and then tell you some of the things that we've done, and then hopefully pivot to some things where I think we can, as Congressman Delahunt mentioned, talk about joining forces and working together. So in Louisiana, we're the #1 producer of fisheries in the lower 48 states. We bring in more oysters, blue crab, shrimp, and some finfish than virtually anywhere else in the United States. And Alaska beats us, but it's because they weight their shells or something in the crabs, and so it's not really fair. But it's just an amazingly productive estuary that we have. And then when you look at the waterfowl, the ecosystem services, I mean, you have the largest wintering habitat for migratory waterfowl in the United States coming down. I have a really neat slide showing that later with 70 rare, threatened, or endangered species. Top source of wild seafood. I mean, just this amazing productive ecosystem that constitutes Louisiana's coastal ecosystem. Going on the energy side, I heard the discussion here earlier and have spoken to a lot of folks about climate change and other things. The reality is that right now we're still using oil and gas, and I think it's going to play a role in our energy portfolio in the future. And folks, this is where about 30% of the oil and gas in this country is either produced or transported, right there in coastal Louisiana. And folks can say, well, let's just stop producing it. But to give you an example, in 2010, oil imports constituted about 58% of our budget deficit. So, if we can produce it safely, this is where it's happening. And it's really just amazing the amount of infrastructure that's down there. This shows you the truck or the cargo flow on trucks coming from Louisiana ports going across the country. And you can see just this profound network of intermodal transportation going from those ports in South Louisiana. Who's comparing or counting, but that's New York. And so, you know, it's really neat looking back over 200 years ago where Thomas Jefferson directed Monroe and Livingston to go acquire New Orleans. And he said to go acquire New Orleans because he recognized at the time that 3/8 of our young nation's produce was going to have to pass through New Orleans in order to gain access to market in our young country. And so you guys know the rest of that story. The entire Louisiana Purchase was acquired because President Jefferson directed Monroe and Livingston to acquire only New Orleans, showing you how profound New Orleans was. They bought that entire tract of land, one of the largest real estate transactions in our world history. But today, Louisiana has 5 of the top 15 ports in the nation, and about 20% of the nation's maritime commerce comes through our port. This is what that looks like. So you see here the thick red line, that's the Mississippi River, the Ohio, and the Missouri, showing you that the thicker the line, the higher the volume of traffic. The little puny lines over in California. You even see the red line going east-west, and that's the Gulf Intracoastal Waterway going from Texas to Florida. And so huge importance in regard to intermodal transportation, in regard to the marine transportation system. And a lot of folks, you know, you saw that statistic right there, 5 of the top 15 ports, and you're like, man, you guys must be economic development whizzes. Actually, we're idiots, and we couldn't screw it up if we tried. I mean, look at the advantage we have from this river system. You can access 31 states through that river system. And why is that important? Well, just comparing the different various modes of transportation, you know, this shows you the carrying capacity. One barge, the carrying capacity in terms of units as compared to everything else. This is 1,750 tons of dry cargo. So you need one barge to carry it. It takes 70 tractor trailers to carry that same amount. If you look at it in regard to a 15 barge tow here, this shows you that you would need over 1,000 trucks to carry the same amount as a 15 barge tow. If you look at emissions, you can see that the efficiency is just amazing in terms of ton miles per ton of greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, you blow everything else away. And then if you look at ton miles per gallon, once again, that marine transportation system, the inland waterways transportation system, is really just an extraordinary asset and incredibly efficient. There's no secret that here in the United States that some of our tax, labor, and environmental compliance policies are more expensive than in other countries. But this marine transportation system, particularly the Mississippi River system, provides this efficiency that allows us to continue to compete on global markets. So what's happening in Louisiana? I talked about how important it is from a maritime perspective, international trade, talked about the seafood productivity, and talked about the energy assets. Well, what's happening there? You know, I feel like that those things are important, not just to Louisiana, but to the country. Well, over the last 80 years, all that red area constitutes land loss. That's about 1,900 miles of land loss. And how big is 1,900 miles? Well, if anybody here is from Rhode Island, we would have 49 states if you lost 1,900 square miles. If you were from Delaware, your state would virtually be gone. And so 1,900 miles is significant. It's a significant area, and that's what we've lost over the last 80 years. This is the Mississippi River watershed. I talked about the 31 states. This shows you the connectivity. 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces are all connected through this watershed. Look at the similarity. This is the Mississippi River flyway. So there's the watershed, there's the flyway. But what's happened is, as a result of, on the left side here, the levees along the Mississippi River system that were put in place after the 1927 flood, we immediately stopped this delta building process in Louisiana. We were actually growing land. The state of Louisiana was growing about 3/4 of a square mile a year from all those sediments and that fresh water coming down from that huge watershed. But as a result of disrupting that natural cycle, that deltaic process, we've trained or channeled all the sediment and fresh water between the levees, which has done a great job in terms of flood protection and in terms of navigation, as I mentioned. It has been one of the largest environmental disasters in our country's history. Again, 1,900 square miles of jurisdictional wetlands loss. On the right side shows you what it used to look like, and that's sort of the various deltas or various outlets where the water in the spring would overflow the banks and deposit sediment and fresh water and allow for this delta building or accretion process to continue. There are other contributions. You see up on the right, subsidence or compaction is contributing, sea level rise, hurricanes, oil and gas infrastructure, and of course the BP oil spill. As a matter of fact, subsidence and sea level rise together comprise relative sea level rise. And we have some of the fastest relative sea level rise rates, or some of the greatest rates in the world. So I talked about what happened historically. This is looking forward. So over 80 years, we lost 1,900 square miles. Over the next 50 years, we could lose over 1,700 square miles. Those of you math whizzes recognize that that's potentially a faster rate of land loss than we've historically experienced. And again, all this is in the area where you saw the huge economic and ecosystem activity. This is what it looks like. So here's current, and this is an active slide here showing you over these decades what's going to happen to our state over the next 50 years. This zooms in on an area southwest of Louisiana. To be clear, these names are towns. People live here. This isn't just birds and fish. People live here. Watch what happens over a 17-year period. So that's over 17 years. So this is a very active disaster or crisis that we're experiencing in Louisiana. So how does that translate into dollars? How do you monetize that? Well, looking strictly at flood protection, at annual flood damages, and this does not include ecosystem services or ecological loss as a result of the land loss or the coastal loss in Louisiana. Just looking at monetizing the flood damages. The various colors here represent depth, and this is all above ground level, not sea level. So for example, over on the far east side to the right there, that's an area just to the east of New Orleans known as St. Bernard Parish. That area in a 100-year storm is projected to have 20 to 25 feet of water above ground level. You can see how, in all these other areas, anywhere from 5 to 20 feet of water in these other areas. You have 2 million people that live in South Louisiana. You hear people going out there talking about economic development projects and road projects and school projects. Those projects don't fare well under 20 feet of water. This is a fundamental need that must be addressed. $23 billion in annual losses over the next 50 years if we do not take aggressive action. So as you see, the current is the green there. The brown is what happens without action. To show you, just going across the Gulf Coast, over the last 100 years, hurricanes have caused approximately $2.7 trillion in damages across the Gulf Coast. And the Gulf Coast, just to give you a quick statistic, if you take the economy of those 5 states, it constitutes the 7th largest economy in the world. So huge consequences and tens of millions of folks who live down there. So here's a statistic that was from FEMA, the Multi-Hazard Mitigation Council report to Congress on behalf of FEMA. Determined for every $1 you invest in pre-disaster mitigation, you get $4 in cost savings. The Congressional Budget Office did a study and determined it was $3. Those of you who watched Hurricane Katrina unfold, you may remember the name General Russell Aare. He was the Army general, wore the beret, came down there. Mayor of New Orleans called him the John Wayne dude. When everything was in disarray, he came in and he said, "I'm in charge." And the guy was impressive in regard to grabbing hold or grabbing the reins of that disaster and forcing agencies to integrate. But I was talking to him about this. In fact, I was listening to him give a speech one day about this, and he was talking about the various reports that are done. And he said, but I tell you, he said, for every $1 you invest, you really get somewhere between $12 and $16 in cost savings. And so I'm sitting there taking these copious notes and just, wow, that is absolutely unbelievable, because I had previously been using this one. So I go running up to him right after. I'm like, "Hey, General, look, I need the site for that statistic. That was unbelievable." He leans over and he goes, "Gary, I made that shit up." He goes, "But I believe it, and I do too." And I want to talk about that in a minute. So here's what we're doing in Louisiana, or here's what we've done in Louisiana to address the challenges that I've just tried to communicate. First of all, we determined